Hey, good morning, everybody. Law and Legitimacy. We're back. It's Tuesday. And yes, Jackson Barrett, I did see your criticism. Too much football, bread and circuses, we're being distracted. I can't help myself, Jackson. It's Mike and my podcast. We like football. We like talking about what we like. So we won't say anything more today except to note the following, that in Ball and Legitimacy, Mike and I are two of the three owners who are as yet undefeated. Next weekend, I faced Jacqueline, Victoria's Secrets, Ms. Polverari's team. She is favored over me. And at the end of the day, it's certain there'll be only two. There'll be at least one more team with a strike in the loss column. I'm hoping it's not me. Hey, let's suppose you answer the phone today, and there's a telemarketer on the other side. Says you've been selected as one of a lucky member of your community for an all-expense-paid trip to New York City, where you're going to be given an opportunity to be wined and dined in a city hotel and take a look at X, Y, and Z. Please respond. How do you respond, Mike?
I'm good, thanks. Take me off your list.
I raised that because I'm intrigued by the new story about the migrant crisis in New York. I believe Mayor Adams yesterday announced that they're going to need $1 billion in hotel fees to help with the influx of migrants in the next year. And I'd read elsewhere in the week that municipal services have been cut across the board by 5%. In order to direct funds necessary to house migrants into the city. And, it raises this larger question about what we're doing with respect to immigration policy and whether we have the ability to construct a policy that is both humane and firm. The narrative of American life, you take a look at the Statue of Liberty, give us your poor, your tired, your huddled masses yearning to be free. I keep waiting for somebody to say it's time to send it back. We've had enough. You're kind of like the guy out there in the boat fishing for smallmouth bass, and you catch them and you throw them back. You've had enough fish. I don't know if we're capable of doing that, but I don't know if we're capable of sustaining the quality of life that individuals in our country take for granted while responding to the number of people flowing into the country. And, the images in New York are pretty grim. And we've not yet hit summer. New York is a sanctuary city. It has expansive rights.
Summer or winter? Do you mean with the weather getting colder?
Yeah, sorry about that. And the political temperature getting hotter. But what's going to happen come winter when people continue to flock into the Northeast? The weather turns nasty, and in New York City and Massachusetts, you've got a right to shelter, but the public loses the willingness to pay for that right. It is a humanitarian crisis, and it's going to break upon us, if not this winter, then next winter. And I think Mayor Adams wins points for candor. I just don't know whether New York can summon the will to do something meaningful. I don't see immigration reform as a primary focus of any of the presidential campaigns. I see Vivek Ramaswamy talking about it. I've lost track of Donald Trump altogether. Mainstream media is not covering his campaign. You'd think he wasn't running at all. And of course, Joe Biden doesn't really say anything about anything. So, in
the Biden context, the news has reported is that he has sent the National Guard down to Texas, and they have begun, cutting up the barbed wire fences and making it altogether easier for those migrants on the path to entry via our southern border altogether easier.
That to me, it's one thing to not have an immigration policy and to say we're going to have open borders. It's another thing to just tear down a fence and say, come on down. I mean, New York's willing to pay. I like Giorgia Meloni. She rose to power in Italy on a populist surge to say, look, what's happening to our country. Apparently, she's snubbed Biden recently. What happened?
So the end of the article talks about this. And it's talking mostly about sort of the tension between Italy as a sovereign nation and then its inclusion within the EU. And the issue politically is necessarily that the resources of Italy, which I'm no expert on what Italy's economy sits atop. I don't know, what that culture in the modern era is doing for itself, but it does appear to me as an idiot American, an uninformed American, that Italy is in a pretty fairly sensitive position economically and politically, and subservient to the larger economies within the EU, namely Germany and France. And so this article that I've got on the screen from the New York Sun does talk about how originally it was France that said that they were going to absolutely enforce their sovereignty, that they were not going to let these caravans of migrants make their way in, and they were deploying military and all sorts of assets to strengthen and fortify their border against those incursions as they're made. That was changed, obviously, with the more top-down politics of the EU. And what we're watching in Italy right now is this, I guess, revival of a sense that Italy is sort of on its own, that it is front and center to the migrant crisis. And the reason I put in parallel New York City and Italy is because they're looking quite similar, but for opposite reasons. New York is most certainly not on the southern border, where the migrant incursions are occurring fairly unabated to date. The migrants making their way to New York City are via bus, right? They are being shipped into New York almost as one sovereign state of our union, showing another sovereign state of our union, which is known through New York City in and of itself to be a sanctuary city for illegal immigrants and those that are seeking protection from enforcement of federal law. And so New York is sort of a hell of its own making. Italy, by contrast, is on the front lines of that. And this article in the New York Sun does a really good job of tracing the political willpower of one Giorgia Meloni, basically saying that this is not Italy's burden to bear alone, if at all. And that being the I guess the basis for pushing back on allowing these migrants to make their way from the northern coast of Africa. It raises the question, though, for me, Norm, that if sovereign nations such as the United States, I don't know, we'll use that as an example, were to deploy adequate personnel and assets and infrastructure to forestall these incursions, either temporarily or permanently, would we then be able to see more accurately the forces that are interested in getting those migrants into our economic zone, right? In other words, if we are to forestall the incursion of these migrants, are we able to more quickly get to a point of like a hot point or a flash point with these outside third world foreign interests that have their own economic incentive to continue sending people into these economic zones? Because it's not by happenstance, right?
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, I'm listening to you, and I'm less persuaded that this is a top-down phenomena directed by elites than
I'm thinking in our case, I'll be very specific. I'm thinking mostly cartel activity.
Yeah,
right?
well, I mean, the cartels aren't growing these people in the fields. These aren't poppies that are harvested. These are people who are traveling through an area and are being harvested once they arrive by the cartels and exploited for purposes of importation. But they're trying to move from one place to another because of the felt necessity of their own lives. And I view migration and immigration and demographics as destiny, as the forces that are driving geopolitics and our culture and our world right now. And I don't think we have a coherent immigration policy, and I think that our ideals are such that we can't have one. And I keep returning over and over again to this Jean Raspail book, Camp of the Saints. That parable so fits where we are in the United States right now, because what we've got is a massive influx of people coming here for a better life, and people who are already here feeling imperiled and feeling that their quality of life is being infringed upon by the arrivals.
They're being disenfranchised by their own government.
And not knowing what to do about it. I was talking to somebody about this earlier this morning, one you, And he said, well, what, and he said, what should we do? Start shooting people? I said, I can't bear that thought, but the thought occurs to me. And he says, yeah, me too. But nobody really thinks we should be shooting people at the border, or if they do, they're not uttering it aloud. And what would that really do? It would eliminate one wave, and a second wave would come. My fear is that globalization, the creation of a global community and standards, worldwide standards, is a way of referring to this, and perhaps a culprit. And I said once before on this stream, and somebody said dead on, until arriving in the United States does not represent a step up in the quality of life, we're almost like a solution in a beaker. You're going to keep adding stuff until there's no incentive to come. And so until the United States becomes a third world country, we will be attractive to people in the third world. And I think we lack the political will to defend our way of life right now, because everybody's equal, and there's this almost a sense of national guilt over our affluence. And so there's a sort of, I'll call it, elitist death wish. Let the American way of life and dream die. We'll go to our resort communities and gated communities to survive, and everybody else is on their own. And I think that's the tendency in politics right now. Unless and until New York becomes as uninhabitable as the Honduras or Ecuador or Costa Rica or wherever it is that people are fleeing from, what incentive do they have not to flee?
Well, I want to say this because I talked before about the notion of assimilation as a central theme of well-functioning immigration policy, right? That the governing structure of our country, that its top priority historically has been, no longer appears to be, but most certainly should be, in my view, assimilating any and all immigrants into the United States, into the American ideal and American cultural values. And I've heard you say that we don't necessarily have a coherent immigration policy, and I think that's a reflection of the fact that American culture has been fractured, and is being sort of disintegrated, and we've done that on our own, right? By and through the protests and riots during the summer of 2020, the continued stoking of these racially divisive flames, a la critical race theory, Ibram X. Kendi, these sorts of things, our elite academic institutions being the sole, not the sole, but primarily, I would say, to blame for younger generations lacking self-awareness over those basic fundamental constitutional principles in the Bill of Rights that you and I talk about nearly every single day. And what it appears to me is that if we're going to put this in a big picture, if we're going to treat this like a big puzzle that we're, just trying to see whatever the bigger picture is, that if we are to concede that there is some sort of force looking for a sort of a one world global government, or global initiative, right? One currency, international borders sort of dissipate. One sort of uniform economic zone, and the pursuit of global hegemony is what we're seeing. Is sort of the I guess the tipping point in the Ukraine-Russia war, right? And the emergence of something like BRICS as an economic alternative to the global reserve currency that is still currently the U.S. dollar. That the only way the elites in the West will be able to assert their will long term is to create a citizenry that will not stand up for its own sovereignty, right, at an individual level, right? That our entire paradigm of existence is being turned over like an hourglass. And then I view this immigration crisis, this migrant crisis, through that lens as sort of a result of many things, Dawn. You've asked, is this migrant flow a natural result of the hungry masses seeing a better life, or is it promoted through various agencies and policies? My answer is that it's probably a little bit of both, but similar to the issues that we saw with COVID and the rollout of mRNA, gene therapy, et cetera, there is, and especially when it came to emergency orders by executives, governors all over the place, it's a little bit of opportunism, right? So there are issues that we have created through the West, through our military-industrial complex. We have destabilized entire regions of the world in the Middle East, some would call the Southwest Asia, and other places, right? Are on the West Coast, if you travel down, we have been involved at a military intelligence and CIA effort in South America. So over the decades of our involvement in destabilizing governments and peoples in other areas of the world, that has so created a mobile demographic of people who do not have wealth to their name and roots and things to sacrifice for where they are, and they are capable of being moved. And at this moment, they also do not represent any parallel in terms of cultural overlap. That is, ideals of free speech, the right to privacy, the Second Amendment right to bear arms. These things that we have instantiated in our Bill of Rights and our Constitution as being endemic to every man in America, right? Every person in America, every citizen is endowed by their creator with those inalienable rights. If you import large swaths of people who do not come from that operating system, as we will call it, or that constitution, they do not therefore expect due process in the pursuit of deprivation thereof, right? They don't expect any of that, and therefore you have a much more deployable asset by collectivizing the interests of peoples who will not be passing down such, pesky things as I've just talked about, Norm. So I went on a little bit of a rant here, but I see the immigration issue is very big in my mind. It's almost macroscopic in that it's very difficult to get one's mind around everything at one time. We have to back up and look at everything in context.
Yeah, but the context is shifting, and and with respect to immigration, it's one of the few times I feel altogether pessimistic and don't have an answer. I've been looking at Dawn's comments and value her contributions a lot. She's a retired sociologist, I believe. And so she raises Talcott Parsons and the notion of boundary maintenance. That is, in the process of forming a discernible group, there are going to be people who are in and people who are out, and there'll be standards that are applicable for groups as small as a family, to extending on up into a clan, into a community, into a state, and into a nation. What happens when you eliminate boundaries? You lose functioning groups, and you might lose functioning society, or you might have a collection of individuals who are bound together without a common conception of right, but they have common interests. And in that absence of a common conception of right, you get anarchy, and anarchy is a prelude to a strongman, to impose some sense of order, because we would prefer security to liberty. When you go up Maslow's hierarchies, that basic needs must be met first, and when they're threatened, you're willing to sacrifice the higher needs. And so it strikes me that we're in a perilous moment. Don goes on to say we have a moral duty to take in migrants.
Whose moral duty?
Yeah, I don't believe that. Years ago, I never got invited back. I was invited to a panel discussion at Yale about something or other, and it had to do with Islamophobia. And I announced to folks that I am Islamophobic. I was aware of no migration patterns of substance where people went from the West to Islamic countries in search of a better life, but rather Islamic people were coming to the West, and they were demanding that we accommodate the ideals that effectively they fled from, and I just didn't have any interest in that. And somebody said, well, don't you recognize the moral duty to take in people from countries that American policies have destabilized? And I'm like, no, I don't feel I have a moral obligation to care for the world. But yet, there is the golden rule, and there is those sense of moral impulses where we want to treat people as we would like to be treated. And if I were a struggling person coming to this country with a desire for nothing other than to care for my family, would I expect others to shun me because there was no room at the inn? Or wouldn't I challenge them to design a better inn, a better and more inclusive inn? I don't have the answers, Mike. I just look at what's going on in New York City, and I just worry about the winter. I worry what's going to happen when you've got Eric Adams telling the world that we can't do it anymore, and the people keep coming. The city's starting to crack. And what is the bare minimum of civility that the city can or can't tolerate? Stay tuned. It'll be an interesting winter as things get a little cooler. So Donald Trump, this is an old topic going from a global sort of thing to a microcosmic analysis. Trump obviously faces a series of trials here and there related to January 6th.
Here and there.
Well, I didn't want to, in Florida, in DC, in Georgia, and whether these cases are strictly speaking necessary as a matter of justice and law is a different debate. We've got them right now, and Trump is a political candidate who believes and has spoken out that these cases are political payback, that they're designed to silence him. And candidly, I think he's right. I go hot and cold. Well, no, I don't go hot and cold. I go lukewarm and cold on Trump. I'm very rarely hot for him. But on this topic, I think he is right. The judiciary has been weaponized against some Americans and not others. And, the J6 prosecutions are what have radicalized me in this context and come to question the priorities of the Justice Department and what it is they're doing. And so now they've taken aim at Donald Trump. And Donald Trump is getting ready to go to trial in D.C. He'll face a trial with Jack Smith, the special counsel. It'll be in front of Judge Chetwin. And Smith has filed a motion for a gag order as to Trump, saying he should not be permitted to speak about certain things because his speech will have a tendency to intimidate potential witnesses. And so his lawyers, Trump's lawyers, responded last night, I guess late last night, with a memo that says, well, so be it. That is speech, and especially political speech in an election year. And the Justice Department is saying, oh, no. Justice requires that as a trial participant, he be silenced so that others aren't intimidated. And if ever there was a cloying political move by a federal prosecutor, this is it. Mr. Smith, you and your department chose to prosecute a man running for president who got 75 million votes last election and still managed to come in second, but it was a huge vote total. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Americans are prepared to vote for him still in primaries across the country, and they're prepared to vote to him because he speaks to their sense of displacement and their sense that the government has come to serve interests other than their own, and they want to vote for him. So you've chosen to prosecute him over his conduct in 2000, the way, your boss, Merrick Garland, continues to process defendants over the riot on January 6, 2021. And many American people wonder, why are they doing that? Why are you doing this? It's not necessary that you prosecute just because you can. You prosecute in order to seek justice. You prosecute in order to promote respect for the law. You prosecute to protect the community. You prosecute to build a better community. If your goal of the political process, Mr. Smith and Mr. Garland, is that we make the political process different by killing the canaries, warning us about the stench in the coal mine, you're doing nothing to address the coal mine. The way you build a better world is by examining the world around you, not trying to lock up people who disagree with your assessment of it. So Chetwin is likely, in my view, to give Smith a substantial portion of what he wants, and then Trump is going to be off to the Circuit Court of Appeals. It's a move that we made with respect to Alex Jones back in the Sandy Hook case, when Alex went on a rant about people who had sent him emails containing child pornography and offered on the air a reward of up to $1 million for information about who had done this to him. And he mentioned one of the plaintiff's lawyers by name, and that firm ran immediately to court to get a gag order against Trump. They found a judge who was willing and able and obliging to their claims, not just then, but in almost every other instance. She was the one who defaulted him. And, spoiler alert, who's trying to suspend me from the practice of law. She has become a partisan in the struggle. And so I think that Trump is right to oppose the gag order. I encourage his lawyers to take an immediate interlocutory appeal to the DC Circuit and get the case in front of the United States Supreme Court as quickly as possible, because it is unprecedented in American history that the Justice Department has prosecuted a man who is running for president and seeks to gag him from speaking about the motivations for the prosecution during the pendency of that trial. If ever there were an occasion for some judges to grow a pair of ironclad balls or ironclad clad ovaries, as the case may be. This is that occasion. This is classic political speech on Trump's behalf. It may be hyperbole, it may be rhetoric, it may amount to abstract calls for violence at some future date, all areas of protected speech. The fact that Smith has chosen to prosecute him shouldn't reflect on Trump's right to appeal to people. It should reflect on Smith's decision to prosecute at this time in this way on these charges as to this man. There are political motivations behind this prosecution. Merrick Garland can pretend otherwise. Jack Smith can stand like the autistic deer in the headlight that he appears to be, but they can't persuade me that they've got clean hands in this prosecution. It's dirty, it stinks, and the protective order to protect witnesses in a case that should never have been brought in the first instance in order to silence a man that they are opposed to adamantly looks to me like the very worst of politics. And if ever there were activities that delegitimized the Justice Department and made it look like a playpen for cronies, like a hack school, this is it.
Yeah, a couple of things here. Number one, I want to recognize our listener, viewer from Australia. Good morning from America, Julian. Julian asks, is it theoretically possible that SCOTUS preemptively intervenes? I'll let you take this, Norm.
So that's an interesting question, Julian. I don't know quite what you mean, but to say that SCOTUS preemptively intervenes suggests, at least on one reading, that they act on their own initiative to say, no, you can't do this. And that is not even theoretically a possibility. The Supreme Court only hears cases or controversies. It doesn't give advisory opinions. And so unless a party brings a case before the court will not issue an opinion. And
that question begs, I think, just a basic reiteration of the sort of the co-equal nature of our three branches of government. At least a textbook version of that, which is executive versus legislative versus judicial. And in the latter, which is where SCOTUS resides under the judicial branch does not have power of sword or purse, meaning that it cannot compel anything beyond what it says the law is when asked, right? So the Supreme Court does not get into the business of issuing advisory opinions or dictating what people should do before there is an active case or controversy. So standing would need to be created in front of SCOTUS before SCOTUS could actively discuss any case or controversy. So the answer to your question is just a no.
Well, that read of the question is a no. Another read of it is if a party were to bring it to the Supreme Court, would the court likely be interested? And I think there's a very strong possibility that it would. The question is, how does the party get there? And, it strikes me that the normal rule is, you get a district court decision you don't like, you take an appeal to the appellate court, and then you ask the court, if you don't like the appellate court's decision, you ask the court to consider the case. By the time that happens, the 2024 election will be over. So it seems to me that Trump's lawyers should be looking for some sort of emergency exception to the normal course of a case to get to the Supreme Court, and it is worth a searching look of a way to get this before the Supreme Court as quickly as possible.
I do think the last thing, because I do want to quickly hit on the caste discrimination bill out of California. Before we go there, what I've got on the screen, Norm, was filed yesterday. It is Trump's legal team's response and opposition to the proposed gag order. What they are branding here as a motion for prior restraint. And so this is wholesale a First Amendment argument being lobbed by Trump's legal team. And I think that, to your point, the plan here, the strategy here, is to establish legal precedent that says, number one, this is protected First Amendment speech. And then number two, the prosecution has to overcome a standard of strict scrutiny in order for this court to allow the gag order to issue. And it goes through, so it builds quite a bit on top of that. And I want to read just quickly here before we go on. But I do encourage anyone listening to this. I'll see if I can post this as the link to this in a comment.
Relief to in favor of the government. It's going to limit Trump's speech, and it's going to do so on the grounds that it has inherent authority over trial participants, and its duty is to assure that there be a fair trial. And so it will find a way, regardless of the standard, to limit Trump's speech. That's abundantly clear. That you heard it here first. Judge Chutkan will issue some form of gag order against Donald Trump, and she'll do so probably within the next 10 days.
Well, and then if you are correct, Norm, which I'm not saying that you're not, I think that what I'm saying here, just based on the content of this motion in opposition, is that, you know, if the price that Trump would pay for violating a gag order as issued on those grounds is contempt of court, i.e., he's incarcerated, that's something that I think, politically speaking, he's willing to wager. Just from my perspective here, not that he does a whole lot of good from a jail cell, but in terms of political leverage, that his willingness to play that game of chicken is what distinguishes him from anyone else in all of modern politics. I also think that the positioning of this motion, if it is denied, this is the interlocutory appeal to the Supreme Court of the United States, Norm. This is exactly how we extricate this from the jurisdiction of D.C. into the hands of SCOTUS.
You know, I hear you. I do a lot of the federal appellate work. In fact, filing a certiorari petition this morning, even as we speak, challenging qualified immunity in the context of search warrants, defective search warrants. But the interlocutory way to get to the Supremes on this case is not obvious to me. It's a very challenging issue. I'd love to see them make a run at it.
Me too. All right. So quickly, I know we're running over time here, and I didn't check to see if you had a hard out, Norm, but I'm going to assume you don't. I'm just going to power through here.
Off today, you know.
So we've got the last one here. I'm not sure if you had a chance to read this story, Norm, but this is really interesting to me. So perhaps we're just sort of introducing this, but the basic overlay here is that California's Senate its legislature has passed a bill that would add the term caste into a protected class. So for purposes of employment, civil rights, housing, and perhaps one other category I'm forgetting at the moment, that a subjective determination that someone is a member of an inferior caste could be a basis for a discrimination lawsuit by and through any of those bodies of law that I just referenced under California law. Now, one might wonder, well, why is this going on? This is an intersection of the First Amendment and federal employment law, as it appears to me. So I feel like I'm scratching the surface here of this issue, but it's the intersection of Indian Americans practicing Hinduism, the emergence of a caste system that we've all read about in our history books as it emerged, the 5 classes of the caste system that I believe has actually been made illegal in India to this day. However, for some reason, and I don't say for some reason, but the tech sector is dominated by a demographic of Indian Americans, right? And we're seeing it here in North Carolina. North Carolina, whether you know this or not, Norm, is sort of is becoming more of a Silicon Valley-esque state, especially with places like Cary and Pittsburgh, and even in Greensboro, where Honda Jet and a lot of Boom Supersonic have invested in our building infrastructure. We are seeing an influx of engineers in the aviation industry, many of them of Indian descent. And so I think that as a cultural phenomenon, the issue of caste is now, coming front and center as it is sort of permeating into whatever sort of employment hierarchical structure. So there's, a lawsuit that's been launched by, I believe, the Hindu American Association. I could be getting that wrong. Governor Gavin Newsom has until October 14th to sign this bill or to veto the bill. No matter what, I believe that you and I have plenty of meat here on the bone for us to discuss with respect to adding yet another intersectional class, a protected class for purposes of administration of our federal and state employment and housing and civil rights statutes.
The Equal Protection Clause says treat everybody equally. I'm so tired of protected classes and heightened scrutiny and strict scrutiny and this, that, and the other thing. Introducing caste discrimination as a protected class is a basic way of injecting socioeconomic considerations in there, and will be used, in my view, as a vehicle to talk about basically Bernie Sanders politics. It'll, if you don't agree with Bernie, you're going to be deciding to discriminate against someone on the basis of caste. I don't view this as a compelling national interest. I hope that Newsom has the smarts to reject this, but I don't think he will, because he's a panderer. And so, I think Vivek Ramaswamy, in his book, I can't recall the title, on victimhood, he made a great point about how the creation of protected classes made
Nation of victims, yeah.
Nation of victims created an incentive to move away from the Horatio Alger story of the American dream, that is a person who succeeds by their own wits, to a person who accomplishes the badges and indicia of success by achieving the status of victimhood. So this is yet another example, at least from without, Mike, hearing about this for the first time this morning, this is yet another example, in my view, of identity politics running amok, creating another sense of entitlement for another group who can claim that they've been deprived a piece of the pie. So
I'm about to blow your mind a little bit, because I think, from what the limited I'm able to absorb before the shows in the morning, I think the real issue here is with the state of California's employment division applying a label to someone and calling them a victim within a workplace. So California is also currently in litigation against Cisco. And that case is one where one of the defendants in that case has been removed. And according to him, the state of California assigned to him one of these victim labels that you just described, when he had no belief that he was indeed a victim of a caste system, as it were. Right now, I don't know. Again, this is surface level stuff, but that would certainly explain a lot about this becoming news, or this becoming law. Certainly something that perhaps Governor Newsom wouldn't hesitate to sign, because it falls in lockstep with more of that liberal progressive agenda, where it's like, we're going to be there to protect any and all victims, however they come to us. And here we are creating yet another one. Hey, you're in a position of social stratification, and you're discriminated against because you don't have the inherited status of your colleagues, right?
I don't know. Let's keep an eye on it. Hey, I want to acknowledge a couple of comments from Severe Conservative before we check out today. He says, I think it's incorrect to describe the branches as co-equal. They have defined powers. That is actually true. Mike, and that's a power that are Severe Conservative. That's a powerful criticism. He thinks the Supreme Court should have far less power than the other branches. In fact, it does, as Mike pointed out. It doesn't have the power of the purse, and it doesn't have the power of the sword. It simply has the power to determine what the law is, and it acts within the limits of the case or controversy requirement. So, Mike, apropos our discussion of California, I want to end where we began. Today, a telemarketer calls and says, Mr. Boyer, you've been selected from among the 300 million people who inhabit this great country of ours to have a dream life. You get to choose. Do you want to spend it and your all expense paid life in New York or California? How do you react?
Take me off your list.
Yeah, I'm there too. I'm there too. I'm going to be heading to California soon. I'm going to be going to a comedy camp with Jay Leno and Adam Carolla. I'm looking forward to it.
That's awesome.
Hollywood, and I have about as much interest in going to Hollywood as I do in New York City. But in fact, I've got more interest in New York City. I've got a grandchild that lives there. My heart goes out to him and to his family. I hope they move soon. But in any case, New York, nah. California, nah. North Carolina, only because you're there, Mike. Vermont, yeah.
How could you resist the center of the known universe, Norm?
I don't. I live in it.
Well, we are here every day, 8 a.m., Monday through Friday. You can find us on X. Please search and find @LawPodDaily. Follow us, like our stuff, retweet our stuff, or repost our stuff, whatever we're supposed to say about that these days. You can find us on YouTube until such time as they kick us off, but we're too small for them to care about now. You can find us on Rumble, as long as Rumble is, I guess, monetized adequately to still host all of its servers if, you know, the likes of HelloFresh and Burger King don't end its brief moment in the sun. You can also find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Overcast, Audible, wherever you find podcasts. Go over there, give us 5 stars, leave us a nice review, or leave us alone. Norm, see you tomorrow.
You will.
Bye.